Welcome to the sixth lecture in Module 1 of our research curriculum on how to perform a literature review. My name is Dr. Alexis N. Bowder, and as many of you know, I'm a Senior Research Fellow with the Program in Global Surgery and Social Change. Today we have three main objectives. The first is to gain exposure to the different literature databases that are available to clinical researchers. The second is to learn how to perform a literature review itself, and the last one is to see an example of a citation manager and one that is free to use online. Today we'll talk about when you want to do a literature search throughout the research process, learn about available databases to search, see different search strategies including Boolean loops, Boolean operators and modifiers, and talk about mesh terms, as well as discuss one free online citation manager that helps you keep all of the articles you find organized and that you can share with other members of your research team. So first we want to talk about when do you want to do a literature search. Often you perform a literature search in clinical research when you want to find more about a given topic, and this doesn't have to be just research related. If you have a patient with a rare disease and you want to look up available treatments, it's helpful to be able to search the literature quickly if you're unfamiliar with the disease they're presenting with. But for our purposes, we're going to be mainly talking about when to do a literature search when you are designing or in the process of performing a research project or a study. And oftentimes you continue to do a literature search or search literature further after you've already decided on your research topic or research question, because as we'll discuss later on, it can really help you fine-tune your project or your idea. Why do you do a literature search? Often in research, the reason you start with literature search is to look to see whether or not it's been done before and whether your question is novel. That way you avoid wasting time, money, and resources on a project that has already been carried out. You also want to perform a literature search so that you have a good idea of what's been done before, where your project will fit in terms of the gaps in literature, and it'll become very useful when you go to write up your findings from your research project in terms of the introduction and discussion. And obviously your articles you find in your literature search will format your references section of your grant or manuscript. The other reasons that you perform a literature search is to continue to gain knowledge about a topic of interest and to see if there's a better thing to study than your original research question. And you might find other variables to include or other measures or instruments to use. For example, if you wanted to do a survey of medical students, you can see if there's already been a validated survey out there that you could use for your study instead of creating your own. And you also want to learn from what others have done, what went well and what didn't go well. And specifically when you're doing the literature search, this is where you're looking at the limitations section of an article or the future directions section and manuscripts. But most importantly, you want to see if your research question has already been answered and if going forward with it will add to the scientific literature and knowledge about the topic, because you don't want to repeat something that's been done prior in the literature. You also want to see where your literature fits in the current research on your topic. Are there any gaps in the literature that need to be addressed, and how does your research fit in? If your research has been done before in another setting, sometimes that's okay because you can put a different spin on the question. So if a study looked at trauma in an urban population, you could look at it in a rural population. If they looked at how cholesterol affects outcomes for male patients during surgery, you could look at how cholesterol affects female patients during surgery. And then specifically, and most relevant in global surgery, is if the topic hasn't been studied in the United States, or for example, in Haiti, there's a lot of research that has yet to be published in PubMed on a number of different things related to surgical care. So that's one thing that would make your study different than a lot of the ones that already exist from all over the world. So once you realize that it's important to do a literature search, the first thing you want to do is become familiar with the different databases that are available. Here is a nice summary of the available databases. Each database has its own strengths and weaknesses, and a number of databases focus on a specific field of research or interest. For example, EconLit the EconLit database will focus mostly on economics. And in addition to having a specific field of research or interest, a lot of databases have strengths and weaknesses and or limitations. So for the Cochrane Library, The benefit is that they only do systematic reviews, but if you're looking for any other type of study, those won't be present when you're searching the Cochrane Library. In addition, as you can see, the global health database focuses strongly on public health practice internationally, but may not be as focused on medical or clinical research. So for the purpose of this lecture, we'll introduce everyone to two databases, PubMed and Google Scholar. Both of these are very useful in clinical research, and PubMed is the first one that we'll talk about today. PubMed is a good starting point when you're looking for articles related to clinical research. The website is listed here, and you can find it with just a really easy Google. But PubMed is a free resource supporting the research of biomedical and life science literature, and it contains over 30 million citations and abstracts within the biomedical literature. Unfortunately, it does not always contain full-text articles, but often those full texts are available, and we'll show you throughout this lecture how to find those if they're present. In addition, PubMed also includes 3 other databases, which includes Medline, which is another popular database that people like to search. So it's a very extensive database for clinical research, and is one that is probably the most used in clinical research. What we see here is an example of once you perform a search, this is what you'll get when you do a PubMed search when you start. On the left, you'll see that you have different ways to filter your search. On the top here, you can filter by year from 1983 to 2020. Beneath it, you can filter by what type of text you're looking for, whether it's an abstract, a free full text, or a full text. And then once you actually want to go in and look at the article itself, you can click on the blue hyperlink. This will show you the abstract of the article, but a number of other important things as well. It'll show you the journal that the abstract or the paper is published in. It'll show you the year, and it will also include the title, the authors, and the abstract itself. And then off to the right, you can see whether or not a full text is available for download for your article. If the full text isn't available, what a lot of people do, and what a great option is to look at and use the same article title or index number and go to Google Scholar to see if you can find the article in a full text version there. Google Scholar typically focuses on research articles, whereas Google itself may provide articles, but also other types of information like websites, guidelines, recommendations. So searching both is not a terrible idea, but we like to focus on Google Scholar here. And as you can see, the format for Google Scholar is very similar. You will get a list of articles here in the middle. Off to the left is where you can sort by time frame, type of article, and then off to the right is where the full text links will be. And then also, most importantly, as you can see here, the last box is you can find all 6 versions of the one article you're looking for, and often within one of those versions, you might find a way to get access to the full text article. If you still can't get the full text, like you see here on the right, you can always email your PGSSC Team Haiti mentor, and we will, with the full citation, and we will find the article for you and send it back to you. Now, performing literature searches is a fine balance. If you start out too broad, you'll get too many results, but if you're too narrow, you'll get too few results. And so, for example, a too narrow study might have a number of different search terms or a very specific location like West Virginia or Port-au-Prince. And so if you narrow it that far, you might not get enough articles or get the right articles that you're looking for. But if you go too broadly and just type in perhaps 2 words, if you're looking at physician attitudes towards emergency medicine and just type in physician attitudes, you'll get over 600,000 studies. So it's really important to know how to broaden and narrow your search because it can be very overwhelming. So there's a couple different methods that you can use to narrow your search. The first is keywords. The second thing that we'll talk about are mesh terms. And the third is Boolean operators and Boolean modifiers. So keywords are often listed after the abstract in an article. but are often included in the abstract and title as well. So using our example of looking at physician attitudes towards the use of ultrasound in emergency medicine, some of the keywords might be emergency, attitudes, ultrasound, and what you want to do is think of potential synonyms for these keywords, but also looking within the articles themselves that you find to see what they list as keywords after the abstract. So if we think about potential synonyms for our keywords, ultrasound, you can have ultrasounds, ultrasonography, diagnostic imaging, sonography, or Doppler. If you think about the word emergency, some similar words to that are emergencies, urgent, emergency medicine, accident, or trauma. And if you think about attitudes, attitudes, belief, point of view, or position. So you can see it be quite challenging to find good keywords to use. And if the one word has a lot of synonyms, it might be difficult to use this for your literature search. So something that has developed is the utilization of mesh terms. So if we were to do a search in PubMed and we wanted to look at ultrasound and emergency medicine, if we wanted to really focus in on the mesh terms, which are predefined terms by librarians, we would click on the advanced search button here. We would then go down to our most recent search, click on this chevron here, and then it would open up to show what terms the PubMed database uses for ultrasound, emergency, and medicine. And that would give us a good starting point for our first 3 mesh terms that we want to use. And when we talk about mesh terms, these are descriptive words used by librarians to identify and cross-reference each article contained in the database, and they may be different from those proposed by the authors. So it's really important to look at these when you go and do a literature search just to make sure and be systematic and exhaustive to make sure that you're catching all the articles that are related to your topic. But you also want to be careful not to choose them so that they're not too broad. So to talk about that in a little bit more detail, just to show you what it looks like on the PubMed homepage, if you want to look at mesh terms and explore the mesh database, there's actually a whole separate database for these terms, and you can click mesh database right underneath explore. That will take you to a very similar platform that you saw when you were searching articles, but you can see in the upper left-hand corner here, you're searching the mesh terms. And if, for example, of looking at ultrasounds and physician attitudes towards this in emergency medicine, we typed in ultrasound, we'd get 14 terms, with the first one being ultrasonography, and then each one below it has a description of the term itself. And then you can see all the other ones that show up within your search. If you click on the blue hyperlink again, this will take you to a more detailed explanation of the term. And then if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see a tree like this, which shows where the term sort of fits in the hierarchy of other mesh terms. So ultrasonography falls kind of right in the middle, and terms above it are more broad. So if we think about terms that are more broad than ultrasonography, we think about diagnostic imaging, which would encompass CT scans, x-rays, all sorts of diagnostic imaging tools. And if we think and look at all the terms below it, these are all the very specific types of ultrasounds that can be performed, including echocardiography and a fast exam or a focused assessment with sonography for trauma. And so if you look at this tree, you'll see which terms are more specific, and you might find the one you're looking for your specific study. You can also see which terms are more broad and go from there. So this is an example of 2 of our keywords, ultrasound and attitude, and these are the mesh terms that go with it and their definitions. The other thing you can do off on the right-hand side is build a PubMed search, and you can add terms to your search. So in this case, we would add ultrasonography and attitudes and search from there. And so here we see what happens when we create a PubMed search builder using mesh terms. We used ultrasonography and emergency medicine. You can see that we got 33 results. And that's from 2004 to 2020. So that would be the beginning of our literature search. Now, mesh terms is what is used to describe the defined terms in the PubMed database, but each database has their own defined terms. So Embase uses Mtree, PsycInfo uses the PsycInfo thesaurus, and it goes on from there. So it's important to know which defined terms we use for the specific database that you're using. But for the sake of this curriculum and these projects will mostly be focused on PubMed, Google Scholar, and the Gray Literature. The other way that you can focus your search is by using Boolean operators. So that's the use of 3 words, and, or, and not. And each word has a different way in which it changes your search. So if you use and between words, that will narrow your search to only retrieve documents or papers that have all of the words that you're looking for. So if you use mice and mouse and rat, it will only retrieve records containing all 3 of those terms. But contrary to that is or. So if you use the word or in between your search terms, this will broaden your search and retrieve records containing any of the words, so mice or mouse or rat. And then if you use the word not between words, this will narrow your search and only retrieve articles that do not contain the term following it. So if you were one to look for mice or mouse but not rat, you would put not in between that word. And another way to look at it more visually is like this. So and is looking for only articles that contain both the terms, or is articles that contain either or, and not is excluding one of the terms. So if we look at this with our example, if we wanted to look at study emergency towards ultrasound, and we really wanted to only look at papers that had emergency, attitudes, and ultrasound in them, this is what we might use: emergency and attitudes and ultrasound. And it would only find articles that have all 3 of those words in the same source. So this is an example using just ultrasonography in emergency medicine. And this is what we would put in our PubMed search builder. And this is what you would see is that you only get 33 results. But if we wanted to use an or and broaden our search, again, this is looking at for both words. So in the picture here, both the te and the cafe. In our example, we are using a PubMed search for ultrasonography and attitudes or emergency medicine. And you can see that our results are much higher. We get 14,000 different articles. So this would be an example of a search that perhaps is too broad. So you really want to fine tune the terms that you're using and how you are using them. So one way to do that is to add Boolean modifiers. So in addition to the 3 words and or not, you can use quotations, which will only search for articles with that specific phrase. So instead of searching for emergency and medicine 2 words separately, it would only search for the phrase emergency medicine within an article. If you use an asterisk, the database will look for multiple variations of the word at the same beginning. So if we're thinking about emergency, emergent, then we would put an asterisk, E-N-E-R-G, and we would get these different variations of the same word. And then if we wanted to use parentheses or brackets, that would tell the database which terms and operators belong together. So if we wanted to look at emergent, but not emergent, and attitudes, it would allow us to sort of fine tune how we organize our search. So now that we've talked about a lot of the different ways to do a literature search and 2 databases to perform them in, where do you go from here? So once you've gathered all your relevant articles, you really need to read them thoroughly. If you're going to cite an article, you must make sure to read the entire manuscript and not just the abstract. And you want to pay special attention to the introduction, limitations, and future directions when you're designing a research project. These sections will tell you what's current about your topic, and they'll also tell you what's still needed and some of the difficulties that the researchers faced when they were studying a similar topic to yours. You also want to focus on the most recent articles when conducting a literature review, but older articles can be important too. And a great place to start when you're designing a research project is to look at meta-analysis, systematic reviews, and review articles because they synthesize a lot of literature on a given topic, and if they're relatively recent, they'll be fairly up to date. So once you have found all your articles, the probably the trickier thing is to keep them all organized. And there's a couple of tools that are available online that are free of charge that allow both you and a research team to stay organized. And those two tools are Zotero and Mendeley. Their websites are listed here. And for the sake of this course, we'll be focusing on Zotero. So if you go to zotero.org, you'll download the program and it'll be an app that you open up on your computer. And this is an example of what your library will look like. Off on the left-hand side, you can store all of your articles in one place, and you can have different folders for each of the different projects in your that you're working on. You can also share literature searches with your team members. So below your individual project folders, you can have group projects where you share with people from all over the world, as long as they have Zotero. And so what you can do is actually, as you're writing a paper, you can keep all of your sources in one spot for that same paper. And as you go through to cite different sources, you can use Zotero while you're working on Word, Google Docs, or any form of writing platform to do the citation. And then it also helps you just keep track of all the articles. And if the full text is available, Zotero will download it for you, so it's all in one place. And the next important thing to stay organized is to sort of do an outline of all your sources, which will be very helpful to refer to when you begin writing your research proposal, your abstracts, or your papers. One of the formats that I like to use for my outline is the title, the year, and the first author of the paper. And then as I read through the paper, I write down what they do for their methods, including the type of study, the population, and the year. I talk about their key findings and the results. And then in the discussion, I really look for the strengths. What was really good about this study? What was really good about this paper? Did I like their methods? Did I like their discussion? And then I look at the limitations. What did they do well? What did the author cite as limitations to their study? And I keep an outline like this for each paper that I read in each folder. And you can label it the same thing as you do your folder. And it's really nice to go back to when you're writing your research proposal, abstracts, or the paper itself. So now that we've talked about how to do a literature search, the best way to learn is to do it yourself. So we'll ask that each of the research teams use a couple of key terms related to their topic of interest and try to find 5 to 10 articles that are recent, so within the last 5 to 7 years related to your topic, and write a few sentences or a couple paragraphs summarizing what you've read from these articles, and then begin to develop your research question. The last thing that I want to say is when you're doing a literature search, if there's any doubt, it's definitely useful and always appropriate to utilize the librarian, especially for some of the bigger studies, including systematic reviews. It's recommended that you use a librarian to sort of help you develop these terms to start. And then if there's any doubt that you're missing some of the literature, you can always reach out to the PGSSC Team Haiti mentors, and we can try to set up a meeting with a librarian to sort of fine-tune your search strategy. So in summary, we've talked about PubMed and Google Scholar, as well as shown a number of different databases that are available online. We've learned how to perform a literature review using keywords, Boolean operators and modifiers, and mesh terms. And we saw an example of a citation manager that can keep us organized as we go through our process of looking for different articles that will help us build and design our research questions and then our research projects. So thank you so much for your time and attention today. And we'll have a session for any additional questions, and we'll be meeting with mentor teams very shortly to begin this process and work together in real time. Have a great day, and we'll see you later.